happy to go, brother. It's the same, that's the same beat.
And the priest of
Good afternoon, brothers.
Paul
He sounds like
Did you have a nice good afternoon? Nobody even played church. Good morning.
Good morning, Father.
Buongiorno a te. We wanted the friends. Can I get our attention? I'm so pleased, the executive is so pleased to see all the fraternity, and we've missed each other for 3 years. I'm just calling us to our first presenter, who I pray that you've all had an opportunity to meet over the last day or so. But John Lemire, a priest from the Diocese of Timmins, comes to us, and we're so blessed to have you, John, with us. Father John is responsible for the priest symposiums for the recently ordained, and then that middle group that I know he'll be talking to us about, in sharing the importance of listening to our brother priests, those who are newly ordained, those who have been in the trenches for a while, and also this connection between they and their bishop and all of us in our presbyteries of making it stronger. So on behalf of all of us, Father John, we thank you for being with us, and without further ado, we welcome you.
Thank you very much, Rico. It's a joy to be able to be with you for this day and to spend this opportunity taking a look a little bit at our own priestly lives and kind of what's happening in the life and the ministry of our brother priests and ourselves. I think it's certainly very apropos that we're beginning today on this feast of St. Vincent de Paul about ongoing formation. Certainly Vincent de Paul was very much concerned about that, and I know that each of you and our diocese are also concerned with this idea of ongoing formation and how can we support one another and our brothers in their ministry. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, as Rico said, I'm a priest of the Diocese of Timmins in Ontario, which is about 8 hours north of Toronto. We're a small and rural diocese. I was born and raised in Timmins. After I finished high school, I went immediately to the seminary, to St. Peter's, a lifer, 8 years, philosophy and theology there, and was ordained in May of '96. And served 3 years as an associate back at my internship parish, and then began as a pastor in New Liskeard and Cobalt for 15 years. The last 8 years I've been back in Timmins at Sacred Heart Parish, and then this last July ended up taking over the cathedral as well as Sacred Heart Parish. And so much of my priesthood has been spent as a pastor of various parishes. Again, coming from a small rural diocese also means that one has a number of different hats, and so almost since the beginning of my priesthood I've served as Director of Vocations and Director of Liturgy for our diocese, and a number of other committees. With my work with the vocations in Ontario, we have a loose-knit association of vocation directors, and we have gathered to support one another. And as a result of that, being chair of the association for a number of years, sit on the Ontario Bishops' Commission for Priests that for the last almost 20 years. And it was from that commission that this idea of the symposium for the recently ordained has kind of come to fruition. We're going to talk a little bit about that later this afternoon. But the theme of the gathering is supporting our vocation in a missionary climate. And certainly both those words, vocation and missionary, have certainly been very important to me in my own priesthood. This idea, especially being a vocation director, trying to always look for men that we might think would be able to serve and to be able to give their lives for the sake of the church and the gospel. And we certainly know that it's a challenge to be able to find those men today, and it's an important aspect of our church's work, and something that we all need to be involved in, not just the one that's appointed from the vocation director, by the bishop as the vocation director. Those of us that are vocation directors, I know Rico has been, I know Josh is, some of you others may have also been vocation directors at times, and we often hear from our brothers, well, how many do we have in the seminary? And my response was, well, how many did you send me? And all of that. So vocation work is the work of all of us. And certainly this idea of a missionary climate, we recognize for a variety of reasons how our diocese and how our country has become very much missionary territory. and how does that affect us in our life and our ministry. And so it's kind of in that context of those two words of vocation and missionary climate that we'd like to spend some time today looking at some very various aspects. A couple of you asked about the presentations. We'll make available the PowerPoints to any of you that would like them after. Well, they'll be sent out whether you use them or put them in your delete box. You're more than welcome to do whatever. If anything that's there is helpful to you to take and to steal and use in your own diocese, certainly feel free to do so. If there's questions during it, please interrupt me. If there's some things that you want clarification, some discussion, I'm more than open to that. In our first presentation this morning, I want to take a look at a survey that was done in 2021 in the United States from CARA, which is the Center of Applied Research in the Apostolate. And the survey is entitled Enter by the Narrow Gate, Satisfaction and Challenges Among the Recently Ordained. Has anybody heard of the survey? Anybody read the survey document? Rico, always one keener in the audience. It's a very lengthy document, and again, I will provide it with the resources that we're sending. It's about a 200-page document, and it's certainly very, very comprehensive. And I think it's very, very enlightening to the work that you as a federation are doing, and we as vocation directors and our commission for priests. And I think that we can gain a lot of insights from it. Certainly, I think one of the things that you know overall is that in Canada, we don't have a lot of reports, we don't have a lot of statistics of our own. And I think that this survey that has come out of the United States, with the work that I've done and what we'll take a look at a little bit in our second presentation after the break, kind of shows the parallel that what's happening in the United States with numbers and statistics and experiences very much, at least in this context of what we're talking about, parallels what's happening in Canada. And as we go through, I'd certainly be interested to hear your comments if you think that that's true with what's happening in your own diocese and what you're seeing happening around the country. And so this survey then was a survey of the recently ordained from 2011 to 2020 of Catholic priests. And the idea of the survey was twofold. The first thing is that they wanted to see how well the U.S. seminaries were preparing men for their priestly life and ministry, and what was giving them the most satisfaction in their ministry, and what was giving them the least satisfaction in their ministry. It was an online survey that was done by CARA, which is a very reputable organization that's done lots and lots of church work in the United States. And it was sent to 1,379 diocesan and religious priests from April to July of 2021. And what's really interesting is that they received a response rate of 73%, which is amazingly high, especially for priests that never respond to RSVPs for anything, especially diocesan things. But to get that type of response rate, I think is amazing, and shows the interest that our brother priests actually have in the well-being of their ministry and the ministry of their brothers. With this age group then of 2011 to 2020, it's broken down into three various age groups. So those that were ordained 6 years and plus, which represented about 15% of those that responded. Those that were ordained between 3 and 5 years, which was the bulk of them, 51%. And then those that were ordained 2 years or under, which was 34%. So a fairly kind of comprehensive breakdown of our brother priests in that 9-year period of time. Not surprising, 76% were diocesan priests and 24 were religious orders. The average age of ordination was 2017, with the average age of those responding was 38%. The vast majority of those that responded were born in the United States. And so the first part of the survey then talked about how well did the seminary prepare them in a variety of ministries. And I think none of this will be a surprise to many of us, and I think that, again, our own experience of seminary life and seminary formation would probably hold true. So the priest said that by and large, what they were prepared well for was their liturgical ministry as well as their pastoral ministry. And so presiding at Mass, preaching, confessions, hospital ministry, presiding at funerals, pastoral counseling, personal skills, even time management and handling stress. Those were the areas that these young priests thought that the seminary had prepared them well. Do you think that that's true for us in our own context, in your own experience of seminary life and formation? When we were looking then at the opposite side, what did the seminary prepare you least for? And again, I don't think this will be a surprise to many of us, especially those of us that are already pastors. Human resource skills, collaborative ministry, leadership skills, administrative skills. And so again, we hear this constantly over and over again of pastors from any generation almost. I wasn't ordained to be an administrator. I wasn't ordained to be a paper pusher. And yet the reality is that is part and parcel of our life and ministry. And I think it's an essential quality of our ministry as being shepherds in the midst of it. And so I think, again, as I said, I think the experience from the United States to what we're experiencing, I think, is pretty well similar in the midst of that. The survey then took a look at how satisfied were these recently ordained priests in their life and ministry as a priest. And again, we see some really great things here, that 59% were very satisfied with their life and ministry as a priest. 22 were some 1%. So 81% of our brothers that took part in this survey are satisfied in their ministry of a priest. And I think, yeah, we can pat ourselves on the back, isn't that great? But as wonderful as it is, when I look at the statistics and I talk to our brothers across the country, it's also scary though that 19% of our brothers are either somewhat dissatisfied, or 13% of these recently ordained, 10 years and under, are dissatisfied. I mean, that to me is a little bit shocking in a sense. Not shocking because I haven't seen this happening, but shocking that we see this demonstrated so clearly, both in Canada and the United States, and we look at some other things as the survey goes on with this dissatisfaction. And these are guys that are newbies in ministry. And how do we get a 20% rate of dissatisfaction after 8 years of formation and 8 years of preparation for a permanent, lifelong commitment? It's not just like, okay, if we went to teacher's college for 2 years and this isn't really what I thought it was going to be, but you weren't going to be a teacher for the rest of your life. But these men that are in seminary know that this is a permanent, lifelong commitment that's there. And already in the early stages, almost 20% experience that dissatisfaction already. We'll take a little in a few moments about what are the causes of that dissatisfaction. Again, when they talked about this aspect then of how satisfied they were with their ministry, again, asked why, these are some of the reasons. Again, focusing on what we've already seen in some previous slides in our own experience. But what brought satisfaction was the liturgical celebration, the pastoral ministry, youth ministry, counseling, those one-on-ones in which we were kind of ordained for, that we want to be involved with our people. And again, that's why so many of us struggled during the pandemic, because a lot of those things, at least in a face-to-face meaningful encounter, were taken away from us. And many of our brother priests then didn't quite know how to cope or what to do, because we no longer had our people in front of us. And so how do we reinvent our ministry in the midst of what's happening to be able to still provide that spiritual connection and to provide that sense of community with our parishioners that are now isolated and at home? And so that satisfaction comes from that daily grind of our pastoral ministry. Again, levels of dissatisfaction, again, not surprisingly, we've already talked about the administrative skills, but again, some of the new areas that come out in this part of the survey about least satisfied, the poor relationship that they have with their pastor. Again, probably one of the things that's a little bit different in the United States than us is that for many of our recently ordained in that age group here in Canada, they're already pastors, so they don't have to have a poor relationship with their pastor because on the day that they were ordained, they were already a pastor. I mean, talking to Josh last night, the day you were ordained, you had 2 parishes and all of that. But in the United States, a number of them are still going into to parishes, but I'm sure in the Archdiocese of Toronto, that would be true in some of our larger dioceses in the West Coast as well, this relationship of pastor-associate. The feeling, and I'm sure all of us have also experienced this, the feeling of being overworked, frustration with their diocesan bishop. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So maybe it's good that our bishops are away at the CCCB and your liaisons are not here today, and we can have a little more fruitful discussion about our frustrations with them. And then interesting, again, the least areas of satisfaction was a lack of fraternity among their fellow priests. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. Again, any of this surprising, resonate, comments? Resonate? So when we take a look then at these levels of dissatisfaction, we want to spend a little bit of time looking at them. This first area of dissatisfaction was a dissatisfaction with their present ministry. And again, that encompasses a whole bunch of things, not only administrative and human resource skills, that we have those challenges of how do we deal with staff and how do we deal with all the bureaucracy that's there. The poor relationship with the pastor, the too much work, feeling of burnout, disappointment with laity. And again, this is going to come up in a couple of different areas in the survey, but that tension that's there amongst the priest and the laity, especially as we see the separation of many of our people from regular participation at Mass, coming simply for sacraments when it's convenient for them, and then checking out after their kid has received, whether it's baptism or communion or confirmation. And the demands that the laity have upon us, but the lack of responsibility or commitment that they have to the church. Give me what I want, but don't ask me for anything. And you need to be there, Father, 24/7 to serve me and my family. And then I don't really care what happens to you. And so that's very much there. Difficulty with staff. I mean, trying to balance all of those issues that are there. And then dissatisfaction with current assignments. I mean, I think that's something that all of us at various times have experienced of why am I been placed in this parish? Why has this kind of been assigned to me and all of that? And so that was the first area of dissatisfaction that many of these recently ordained then experienced. Moving from their present ministry, the second level of dissatisfaction was dissatisfaction with diocese. And again, some of their thoughts on this. The lack of communication between the diocesan office and the parish. That there's just way too much bureaucracy. That feeling that they're not cared for. That the only time anybody from the diocese reaches out to them is when they're in trouble for something. Or when something has to be done. But there's no care, there's no affirmation. Ineffective councils and deaneries, going to meetings upon meetings for the sake of going to a meeting, but achieving and producing nothing. Another big area, the poor assigning process. Why was I assigned to go to this parish? Why was I assigned to do this? And again, oftentimes, well, because there's a hole, and that's what you're supposed to do, Father, because that's what you said in obedience. And so there's those struggles that are there. That's why I don't know of any diocese in Canada, but talking to some of my brothers in the United States in some various dioceses, they actually have an internal system within the diocese of internal postings of pastors. And so Parish A is going to be open next June. And if you're interested, you apply to the diocese and say why you think you would like to go to Parish A. What you think you can bring to it, how your skills, how your ministry would match what is happening there. I don't think it's something that we've considered or is being done in any areas that I'm aware of in Canada, But I think it's something that perhaps we could be looking at, instead of this idea, all of a sudden, we've got a hole, and now I gotta pull you. Remember my first year of ministry, I'd been assigned as the associate back to the internship parish. I knew that even before I had left the internship that I was going back, and wasn't even in the parish for a month, and get a call from the bishop. I want to talk to you after a study day that we had. So a couple of days later we met, and all of a sudden he had a crisis that needed to be fixed. There was a neighboring set of 4 parishes that he needed somebody to celebrate Sunday Mass to, and so his wisdom, I'm young, I could go and celebrate in those 4 parishes on the weekend, but Monday to Friday minister to the parish that I had been assigned to. And I said to him, like, Bishop, how does this make any sense? I mean, he was a former seminary formator. He had served on the Apostolic Visitation Committee for seminaries in Canada. He was a good man. He was a religious man from a community. I said to him, how does this make any sense, and anything that's come out on the research about the importance of stability and positive postings for a guy in his first 5 years of ministry? So you want me to be a circuit runner going to these small little communities on Sunday, but then expect me to have effective ministry with the parishioners in the large parish that I never see on the weekend? Oh, I never thought of that. In the end, he didn't do that, and I stayed where I was. But it was, I got a problem, I need to fill this hole. And so let's just fill the hole that's there. So dissatisfaction with dioceses. The lack of mentoring process. Again, we'll talk about this later in the day, but this idea that we have a guy in formation for 8 years, we're under the microscope doing all of these things, and then we ordain them, and then there's no supports that are there for him. Nobody to accompany him oftentimes. And often, if there is an accompaniment, it's because the guy himself reaches out to another older priest, a retired priest, a neighboring priest to ask. But it oftentimes doesn't come from the diocese, and there's no thoughtful or consistent process to be able to do that. Certainly, again, not surprising to us, dissatisfaction with the idea of the handling of the sexual abuse crisis and all of those, and especially those of us that are affected, particularly in some dioceses where there was lots of abuse, but also in the global sense of how the church has handled that. Again, dissatisfaction with the diocese on the overfocus of money. Again, what do we often hear from the Chancery offices? You got to take up this collection. We need more of your diocesan tax and all of this. And yet, you ask, well, how is it being spent? I mean, I just recently got appointed to our Diocesan Finance Committee after 20 years of asking to go on it because we had very ineffective leadership on it. But asking the question, okay, you want more money, but what am I getting out of that more money? I'm not getting any services from this office, this office, this office. Why do we still even have them, other than that's the way we've always done it before? And so this idea of dissatisfaction. And then the last area that has come up, and we've had some conversations even just in the last 24 hours, this idea of feeling persecuted by the diocese. And again, I think many have experienced some of that, especially in the midst of the COVID situation. And some of us trying to do creative things to try to minister to our people, and the diocese saying no. We're having some conversations this morning at the breakfast table about some of the issues around the Indigenous file, and priests saying something that wasn't perhaps politically correct and then being suspended or being slapped, and a publicly kind of mentality. And so very much that sense of persecution that's there, that many of these recently ordained, and I think even those of us that are been ordained for some time, don't always feel that our diocese have our back. We're expected to have the back of the diocese, the back of the church, never speak out against it and all of that, but it isn't always a two-way street. Even more specific than this idea of dissatisfaction with the diocese, let's go one step further, is many of them resonated with this dissatisfaction with the bishop. And again, there were 2 key areas that kind of were mentioned over and over again in the survey responses. The lack of a relationship that the priest has with the bishop. And again, I think, and we'll see a little bit of this a little bit later as well, for the most part, most priests don't want to be best friends with their bishop. And those that do, that's a problem, and that's another issue, and that's another conference. But most of us don't want to be best friends with our bishop. But we want to be friendly with our bishop. We want to know that he cares about us. We want to know that he has our back. We want to know that he knows our name, and where we're at and what we're doing. And yet, both in large dioceses, but also I hear this across the country in small dioceses, the same issues kind of are there. My bishop doesn't know me. He doesn't know what's happening in my parish. He doesn't know anything about my family. He doesn't know anything about who I am. And so there's that lack of relationship that's there. And then again, a frustration amongst many of the recently ordained is that there's a lack of vision in the diocese by the bishop himself. What's happening in the diocese? Where are we going? This idea that oftentimes we're being asked to do more and more because we've got to maintain the status quo, when maybe instead of giving me 6 parishes, we need to be closing 3 of those parishes. But how many bishops have publicly said, as long as I'm bishop here, we will not close any parishes. We will bury priests instead by killing them of overwork, but we will not close parishes. There is no vision that's there. And we're continually just simply filling holes, putting more and more work on our brothers, and we don't know where all that's going. And so that sense of dissatisfaction that's there. A fourth area is frustration with their fellow priests. I'm sure none of us have experienced this. This must be just a uniquely American thing, that none of us would have any frustrations with our brothers. But again, some of the things here are not going to surprise us. A lack of cohesion within our presbyteries. We're going to talk about that this afternoon, about how do we build perhaps more intentional, more vibrant, more life-giving presbyteries that are here. Certainly we've experienced the culture wars with our brother priests, whether it's the right and the left, whether it's on liturgy, whether it's on social justice, whether it's on COVID, whether it's on whatever. There are those wars that are there, and I don't talk to that group of priests because they believe this. I'm not going to hang around with them because they do that. And so we're seeing more and more in our presbyteries across the country, across North America, this polarization that's there. And then the generational differences that I don't think we've ever really got a grasp of or an understanding of. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about that as well. And how do we get to know each other based on not only who we are as people, but understanding the mindset that we have because of the generations, because of the seminary formation that we receive at various stages over these past 50 years. And how does that affect our interaction with our brothers? How does that affect, especially when you're an associate and a pastor, and those generational differences? A fifth area of dissatisfaction is, again, moving a bit broader in the United States, this dissatisfaction at the national level with the U.S. Bishops' Conference, and certainly I think we could probably put also that to ours. How many times we've scratched our head reading various press releases or messages that come out of the CCCB that nobody in their right mind in the parish is going to read. Why do we have a 3-page Christmas message from the president of the CCCB? How many of our parishioners even know what the CCCB is, let alone what the president is, kind of mentality? And so there's that notion of being out of touch with reality. And let me just be very clear here, brothers. I am not anti-bishop. I have great admiration for our bishops. And I work very closely with a number of them, very closely with my own bishop. I love these men. But because of some of the issues, the generational gaps, because of some of their formation, because of some of their lack of experience, many of them have not been pastors like us in the trenches. They just sometimes don't get it. I'm sure you've had those experiences. I can't be the only one that's had that. And so there's that dissatisfaction at the national level. Again, where's the vision and all of that? And then we also know that there's dissatisfaction in the church at the universal level with our Holy Father, Pope Francis, that perhaps we've never seen in the last number of generations kind of mentality. And again, that could be a whole other conference that's there. But at least we have to acknowledge it and to be able to say, okay, well, there is a tension that is there. We see that tension played out not only amongst ourselves in our conversation, but I mean, perhaps a little less political in Canada than in the US. But I mean, you see bishops pivoted against one another in the US in public statements and all of that. In Canada, we tend to be a little more diplomatic. But trust me, brothers, it's there. There are many of our bishops that scratch our head at some of the things that come out of Francis, come out from some of the dysenteries that are there, and wonder, how does this connect with the lived experience of us here in Canada? So that's a fifth area. And then finally, a sixth area of dissatisfaction with our brother priests. Again, we're talking 10 years or less in this survey. Lonely and isolated due to celibacy. Not having an adequate social life. So many demands that they don't have a balanced life. I think that all of us, regardless of our age group, can relate to that. I mean, with more and more being placed upon us, that means that there's just less and less time for me. And so I think what we see oftentimes with our brothers is one of two directions. Guys that have experienced this come head to head and say, the hell with it, I'm taking care of myself, and are absent landowners at the parish, and others of us that are killing ourselves, putting in 80, 100 hours a week, trying to keep everything going. I mean, how many of us since we've been here have answered emails, phone calls, written pastor's messages, so that when we go back, things are still going to be ticking, in addition to all the other things that we're doing here. And so how do we live this balance? I mean, I know a number of years ago, I think one of the documents that the Federation put out was about a balanced lifestyle 20 years ago, and it's only gotten worse in the midst of that. Again, we talked a little bit about this dissatisfaction, persecuted by brother priests and laity. We talked about the laity, but we also know with those various culture wars that are happening in our diocese, the persecution of brother priests, one to another. And then, interesting, we see really the humanity of our brothers. One of their dissatisfactions in their life is their own sinfulness, their own brokenness, which I think is encouraging to see that there's that recognition that's there. I thought that was a really hopeful sign, because a lot of all of this dissatisfaction can, in a sense, be part of the bureaucracy that's there and all of those types of things. But when I saw that comment about one of the things that weighs our brother priests down, these young guys, is their own personal sinfulness. And it just, again, shows that they are taking seriously their own vocation. They're taking seriously their desire to grow in holiness and saintliness. They're taking seriously their desire to lay down their lives, and yet they recognize that they fail in the midst of it. Any questions, comments about that, about the levels of dissatisfaction? Anything that you would add that wasn't covered, category, or... Yes?
What about those who feel that they have less things to do in their time?
They're idle? Yeah, I think that in some places, the guys that are twiddling their thumbs, not sure what to do. And again, I think that goes into part of the process about why did this guy get assigned to this parish? You sometimes hear some guys that are vibrant, full of life, and get sent off to this rural parish that they got 4 funerals a year. They don't have a school, they don't have a nursing home, and some of them are saying, like, what do I do all day? Kind of mentality. I can only call my people so many times. I can only work on a homily for so many hours. And it leads to, in some cases, yeah, that sense of boredom. And then that boredom then, unfortunately, often leads to some, if left unchecked, some struggles with addictive behavior. Whether it's with drinking, with pornography, with looking for love in all of the wrong places, and all of those types of things. Yeah.
I'd like to come to the mic.
Sure.
Because my voice is not very strong, so I need a mic here. First of all, I would like to thank Father John for very good presentation. Few things I would like, it touched me when you mentioned about the relationship between priest and bishop. In my life, the Diocese of Regina, I have 4 bishops I went through, and totally different mentality. And if eventually some of you may be bishops someday, and this is personal sharing. This is personal sharing, I see. If you are so friendly to priests, it's good, but sometimes it's not working for parishioners. If you are too rushed, too hard to your priest, it may be not very good for the priest. We don't like the bishop. And if you are, when you talk about the chancery, people who work in chancery and lay people who work with the bishops, some bishops listen to them too much and carry on, and I see no good for priests. Some priests, personally, I don't like that way. When the bishop listens too many things from lay people, and then let the priest down. I don't know, what do we do? Your job, John. You have to say something, and that's the first thing touched me when you mentioned our bishops. And what do we do in future if you are bishops, or what do we bring it up to our bishops and find out what way? And the second point I would like to mention, to bring it up, is about the seminarians in future. You mentioned in states, they're very locally American born. They went to seminary. And how many Canadian borns we see enter seminary in Canada here? Personally, I introduced 3 Vietnamese seminarians from Vietnam, introduced to my diocese. They was ordained already. 1 more to go in Edmonton today. So that's another point I like to see. Relationship between bishops and priests, and how do we nurture Canadian born to join to the seminary. I think that's all I have today.
Thanks so much, Thomas. Yes?
I know from myself, and talking to brother priest in my zone, some of one of the concerns is personally for myself also, I don't like to deal with staff salaries. That's what
That's the way I talk.
Yep.
having to figure out like what's a just wage and stuff like that. But thankfully, we do have a human resource in the archdiocese, but they just do the research. But ultimately, I have to kind of figure out the number or the value. But I hate having to do that.
Yep.
That's not my strength.
Yep, that can be a challenge for sure. Yeah.
I was going to say, one thing I noticed in the presentation, I think it's shocking to me that priestly fraternity only shows up in the dissatisfaction column. That the relationship with brother priests is not something that's all reflected in the dissatisfaction column. That has to do with personal ministry, parishes, and that sort of thing. And it just really underscores to me the importance of really working on that in our dioceses, that young priests that are recently ordained could not find consolation in the community of their brothers.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, but I think there's some variety of different reasons for that. And not all of it is in a sense negative, but I think just the more and more demands that are placed upon us, the less time we have to get together with the brothers. The vast, in many of our dioceses, just the vast distance between one brother and the other, to get together, even sometimes in the same diocese, but you're hours apart. Just even like, I think in Toronto, even though you're not that far apart, you put in travel time, a short little trip is still a 2-hour experience kind of mentality. And so we have less and less time for that. Yep. So again, from the survey, one of the quotes, not feeling supported or welcomed by the pastor who mentors them, their bishops or diocesan leaders, and or their fellow priests who live in the area, are factors most likely to be associated with being dissatisfied. Goes on to say, many report not feeling their diocese or religious institutions are thoughtful about assigning them to their initial assignments that will provide them with mentoring and support they need during their first 5 years of ordination. So again, just that constant re-echoing of kind of that feeling of being abandoned. And we often have talked about this as vocation directors around the table, is that we work so hard as vocation directors to get a guy, first of all, to apply to the seminary, support him during his 8 years in the seminary, and then all of a sudden, we leave him to the wolves. The vocation director then is told, no, your job is done, stay out of this, Father, it's none of your business now anymore. And whose business then is it? Who is going to support that priest in the midst of that? And that was part of where the impetus came for this symposium for the recently ordained that we'll talk about this afternoon, is how can we support these men in their ministries? All right.
John?
Yes?
One of the things that, when you just said that, when I was talking to a few of the young priests who they're going into their assignments, I told them, if you don't get along with the pastor, if you find that this is not going to work, don't wait a whole year. Make the decision, talk about it, if you can't talk to the mentor who you're dealing with, talk to the diocese so that they're aware that this doesn't seem like working. Help me.
Yeah.
Stop that problem.
That openness, that honesty. But again, it's that problem is how come bishops or their delegates are not checking in regularly with these guys? And I think that one of the problems that we have, and somehow we need to address it with the recently ordained, and we need to address it during seminary formation, is that how do we teach guys not to be afraid of their bishops? Because I think one of the fundamental problems, especially amongst many of the recently ordained, is they're afraid to be open and honest with their bishop. Because what happens if he doesn't like what I'm going to say? I often say to my own bishop, whether you ask me or not, I'm going to give you my opinion. And you may like it, you may not like it. You may listen to it or you may not listen to it. But at least I'm going to share it to you and I'm going to tell it to your face kind of mentality. And I'm lucky I have that open relationship with my bishop. But again, I think most bishops are open to that. But we have this fundamental fear, especially amongst the young guys, but I think it also goes to other cohort generations, that I can't be honest with the bishop about what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm struggling with, what's working, what's not working. But we somehow need to create more healthy dialogues, and it's got to begin in the seminary with these guys. I mean, the sad reality is in many dioceses, bishops don't even know who their men are in the seminary. If all they do is come once a year to read the report and have a barbecue before they send them off to September, how is that helping them? And again, we'll talk about this a little bit in the afternoon, about this idea of building intentional presbyterates, that it's not just the job of the bishop, but it's also the job of us as brother priests, and how do we support not only brother priests, but as priests, how do we support seminarians, even if you're not the vocation director, because it's also your work to do that. But for a variety of reasons, many don't do that. Next area the survey looked at is what are the largest problems on a daily basis that these young priests experience. And again, not surprisingly, the different age cohorts of the priests in their diocese, theological differences amongst their fellow priests. And then the third, though, area that came out that we haven't seen before yet is 39%. This not feeling they have input into the decision-making process at the diocesan level. Again, that idea, that disconnect from the chancery or the diocesan center to the parishes. We're asked to be doing these things, but we're in the trenches and saying, Bishop, this is not going to work. Bishop, this prayer of the faithful that came out of whatever office doesn't even make sense. Let alone, how are people going to relate to that? Taking a look at trying to put together a pastoral plan or to deal with particular issues, and yet not having any say. Similar to sort of what Thomas was saying, that the bishop will rely more on the voices of the lay people that are working at the diocesan center, who again, many of them, God bless them, are great working people, but have never experienced in a parish. And the demands that we have and the juggling that we have, brothers, to do in trying to keep everybody satisfied, keep the parish going, and then do all of the things that we're supposed to do. Bury the dead, take care of the sick, make sure that we're in the schools, make sure that the roof leak is fixed, and all of those types of things. That there's that lack of sense of what real life in ministry is. Maybe, perhaps, as a response to what Thomas is saying and the issues, maybe we need to have chancery staff be mentored by pastors to say, come and live with me for a week and see what happens in the parish before you send me another to-do thing. And you realize that this is number 49 on the list that's there. So that's where the daily struggles in those three kind of big areas. Again, none of this should be a surprise to us. What programs are available in their diocese that support them during their initial years? Now, one of the things, though, that did surprise me, not that it's on the list, but that 99% of them said that retreats supported them during their initial years. I mean, the sad thing is that we're seeing in many dioceses, I know my diocese has been like this for many, many years, is we no longer have a diocesan retreat because we just simply don't have the men to gather kind of mentality. When you're a bilingual diocese of French and English, you need to have 2 different retreats, 2 different retreat masters, you got 2 small little groups that are there. I know of many other dioceses, not even necessarily small dioceses, but no longer have an annual priest retreat. You're left on your own to do it. So again, the brothers are never getting together to be able to spend that time that's there. Again, what surprised me, not that it was on the list, but the high percentage, spiritual direction. And again, the reality for many of us that come from rural dioceses that have great distances, where do you find a spiritual director these days? If you're in some of the big areas, that's great, wonderful, and all of that. But in many of our other dioceses, where do you find competent, trained people that can give direction to brother priests? So I mean, I think that's an issue that is there that we've never really addressed in terms of our realities that are there today. So again, I don't think any of these areas themselves will surprise us that they found support in the midst of it. And the last thing I want to look at before we take our break is in the midst then of all of these things that are happening and situating this is brother priests, their first 9 years of ministry, asks the challenging question, would they enter the priesthood again? Knowing what they know today, would they enter the priesthood again? One of the things I thought, first of all, was really encouraging was that 96% of our brothers said that they would enter the priesthood again. 80% said definitely, which is a really high percentage, definitely. 16% probably yes. And then, I know the numbers don't exactly add up, but that's the way they were written. It's that with the 5% shows 101%, but when you do the points and all of that. But 4% said probably not, and 1% said definitely not. And so again, as wonderful it is that 96% of our brothers in their first 9 years of ministry said that they would enter it again, we see 5% of them saying no. And again, where is that disconnect between what they received in the 8 or the 6 years of formation and spiritual direction and all of those things, pastoral internship, some of them probably would have had propaedeuic years then, and yet we're still seeing that. Again, the question changed a little bit from would you enter again to talking about their future. Priests were asked about their future ministry, of whether they see themselves staying or leaving. And again, good to see, 94% of our brothers said that they were staying. But again, not surprising then, 6% said that they were uncertain about their future or probably would leave. And the numbers in the brackets are actual numbers of respondents, just so that you get an idea, like what does 1% of the total? Well, that was 8 guys of that 1,100 that said that they will probably leave ministry. Well, 47 of those guys that said they're uncertain about their future. Again, when they were asked then to kind of elaborate on this, that if they ever thought about leaving the priesthood, what were their primary reasons? And again, this probably wasn't going to be a surprise to us based on our own experience and hearing what the survey results celibacy and loneliness, frustration with the diocese, disappointment with their ministries, their living situations, or those whom they minister to, overwork and stress, issues within the larger church. So again, not a surprise. We've seen this played out with the statistics. We see it played out in our own diocese. We know of guys that have left ministry ourselves. This next slide, though, and this next question, I thought was a little bit startling to me, was, do you know of someone who left active ministry or the priesthood within their 5 years of ordination? So again, of the guys that are ordained 10 years or less, do you know somebody in their 5 years of ministry that have left? Percentage guess? How many guys knew somebody?
99.
Not 99.
60.
Not 60, close. 79% of these guys knew of somebody that left ministry within their first 5 years of ordination. To me, that's a high number of these guys. And again, I don't think I've seen any research that's done on this. What is the effect of that for these men? How does it affect them psychologically? How does it affect them spiritually? How does it affect them ministerially when you see your brothers, many of whom you've been in the seminary with for 3, 5, 8 years, throwing in the towel for a variety of reasons? I don't mean that judgment. I know it may have come across. I don't mean that judgmentally, and I apologize for that. But that you've lived with, that you've worked with, may not be in your own diocese, but neighboring diocese or whatever. What type of psychological and spiritual effect does that have on a guy?
Rico, can I speak to that?
Sure.
I'm sadly part of, although I'm past 5 years, but 80%. You know, and guys, maybe it's also the vocation half talking. Could we have done something about that before they leave ministry? Because I'm finding that guys aren't like taking a leave and thinking about their life. They're like, I'm leaving. And I just asked the question of, well, we slowly saw the guy isolating, and he wasn't coming to retreat, or he wasn't in the priest group, but da-da-da-da-da. Nobody did something about it, and now he's gone. It's like, you know, could we have done more to support the guy, as opposed to, well, you know, why did you leave, or, you know what I mean? What could we do to bring our brothers close? I don't know if that's other guys' experience too, but I'm tired of hearing of the guys leaving. I'm like, what are we doing to support them? Because we might agree with their principles, but we're not leaving the trenches, you know?
Yep.
I don't know.
And again, one of the other comments I hear from bishops is, I didn't know that this guy was struggling. I was the last to find out. By the time he came to see me, he had already made up his mind. He had already put the deposit on the apartment. He had already called the movers and then came to see me, and that. And part of it is, okay, yeah, Bishop, that's shocking, but what did you do to reach out to this guy during these 1, 3, 5, 10 years of ministry that you didn't know exactly? Yeah, and some guys are really good at hiding that because they play the game, because they're afraid to be honest open with the bishop. But again, if we had put some of these things in place over those years, starting in the seminary to years of ordination, would that also make a difference? Again, what about us as brother priest to brother priest? Do we reach out? Again, talk a little bit about this afternoon with this idea of building intentional perseverance, and how serious are we about doing that with our brothers? Yeah. So as these recently ordained were reflecting upon the 79% that they knew somebody that left ministry, the question was asked with them, if you had a discussion with the guy that left, what was his reason for leaving? Again, oftentimes there are a great number of us that don't know why guys left. We just know he's left. We sometimes make judgments. Sometimes they do talk to us openly about that. And so again, the statistics that came out is that the reasons that a guy told one of their brothers why they were leaving. Again, I thought it was interesting. The top number was 40% that left was because they were disillusioned with the actual life of ministry. 40%.
Does that mean that they didn't know what they were getting into?
Yeah. didn't quite know what they're getting into, the living situation with the pastor, the demands that were going to be placed on them. And again, I'm thinking like, what are we, like, how could you be disillusioned? I mean, again, now that we especially have internships, the guy is there, how could you not know what life is like and what the demands are? But again, I think that with seminaries, we often go in with these rosy-colored glasses, kind of, that things will be better when I'm a priest, and things will be better in my relationship with the bishop, or things will be better with my relationship with my brother priest, because, I mean, I'm just a seminary now, so they're not going to talk to me, and they're not going to, but once I'm a priest then. So I think there's a whole bunch of disillusionment for a variety of reasons that are there. But that was the top reason, is this disillusionment. The second one was the idea of loneliness that's there. And then it's only meeting someone, having a romantic partner, and then the list goes on in the midst of it. But this disillusionment, yes?
Yeah, so everything outside of the first one is all psychosexual human development. But the first one, so that identifies, I was expecting this kind of a relationship with my bishop, with my priests, with my parishioners, and I didn't get it. Is that what the first category is capturing?
Yeah, I think it's all those things. Like, yeah, the dissatisfaction with their life of ministry, everything from their assignments or why they were sent there, to struggles with the pastor, to the overwork that's there, to conflicts with brother priests, to conflicts with laity, to being thrown in to be a pastor the day after you're ordained and not being prepared, not having supports, all of those levels of dissatisfaction. We talked about the ramming of stuff from chancery, or crazy press conferences with the Holy Father, or, I mean, the whole gamut that's there.
Okay.
I think the comment about lack of connection to the diocesan presbyterate, it speaks to my earlier comment about what can we do to support them too. You know, because it's easier for us to say, well, they're the problem. They didn't reach out. They did, like you said about the bishop that was shocked. But, you know, what do we do as brothers to support that presbyterate so that 9% might go away? You know?
Yep. Any comments, questions before we take our break? Was this helpful? Do you think overall it speaks to our Canadian situation?
Yes. Yes.
Do you think there's anything missing, kind of from our Canadian situation, from our perspectives, from Western Canada, Eastern Canada, Ontario?
I don't think it has addressed the particular challenges that international priests would have entering a diocese, and how I think they have some unique challenges. I know coming into our diocese, I find our particular diocese has not welcomed foreign priests very well. We haven't given them enough to do. You know, we've sent them off to the middle of nowhere. You know, but I think it's enhanced. I mean, you can send me off to the middle of New Brunswick and I can be quite happy, even though I was raised in a city. I can figure that out. But if I come from Nigeria and are trying to figure out the charms of small town New Brunswick, it's a challenge that is beyond that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. Again, if you remember the context of this survey, talked about 82% of these priests that were surveyed were born in America. And so I think, again, their situation demographically is a lot different than ours. Again, going back to your theme about vocations in a missionary climate, I think we are much more missionary in in Canada at this moment in terms of the reliance and generosity of our brother priests from around the world serving our dioceses, especially many of us from rural dioceses in particular, and that, yeah. Any other comments or remarks?